The book of Job, could it possibly be a parable or like a fable or an allegory or something like that? Potentially, it could possibly be. The question that I like to ask with any of these conclusions is, what in the text led you to that conclusion? So in the New Testament, when Jesus is telling parables, a lot of times you'll see a phrase that goes a little something like this. And Jesus told them a parable saying, the kingdom of God is like ... So when you've got that sort of preface, you can say, okay, that is for sure a parable. There's a couple of times when Jesus tells a story where it could potentially be a parable because it's structured similar to his parables and because he tells parables on a regular basis. So you can conclude that it could potentially be a parable. But because it doesn't have that preface, you could also potentially conclude that maybe he's telling a real story of something that happened. One example of this is the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan is not prefaced by the phrase, and then he told them a parable saying the kingdom of heaven is like, but rather is prefaced by the argument of, who is my neighbor? You have to love love God, love your neighbor. But who is my neighbor? The lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus goes right into it. He says that there was a man who was going, I don't remember if he was going down to Jericho or up to Jerusalem. I forget which direction he's going. He's going down to Jericho, and he falls along the way to robbers, that sort of thing. And Jesus just launches into the story. Is it possible that it is a real story? Yeah, that's something that could have potentially happened. Nothing in the story is outside of the ordinary. People probably got robbed on the road on a regular basis. Probably less regular because of the Romans. They were actually pretty good about security, but still, it's dangerous to walk on the road, to walk in a path, especially to Jericho. But for Job is different. Job is not, you have a series of parables that Jesus is telling, and then one of the stories he tells is not necessarily prefaced by the word parable. Job is a book that's, it's distinct. It's not like Job 1, Job 2, like the first and second Job. It's just out of nowhere, here's this interaction of, God and the devil regarding Job, and here's this thing that happens to Job and his family, and here's all the people who say things, and then at the end, God comes in and he spends a couple of chapters telling Job what's what, and telling Job's friends what's what. And then Job has a few things to say at the end as well that make it into almost every funeral sermon. I know that my Redeemer lives. That comes from Job. Is it a parable? Could it potentially be a parable? Possibly, but then again, there's no indication that it necessarily is. My understanding is that the kind of going theory among competent conservative theologians is that Job was the first book that was written down. Even before Moses wrote down Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the book Job was the first one that was written down. And this makes it hard to figure out, where does Job fit in the story? Could Job be potentially something where Job and his family lived, let's say, before Noah? That could potentially be something that happened, and this was just a recording of that history. Or maybe Job lived after Noah. There's not really a lot of details to it, which is another reason a lot of people kind of look at it and say, well, it could potentially just be kind of like an Aesop's fable type story that teaches you a lesson. I don't really... It's a possibility. It's not like it makes you not a Christian if you believe that Job is a parable or a fable. I tend to think it's not, though, because God regularly uses the life of real people as an example for other people. Like we learn about things from David and from Abraham and Jacob and Esau and all these other people. The story of Jonah was another one that for a long time people would think, and this is during the Bible times, a lot of people would think that this is a parable. It's such a fantastical thing to get swallowed by a whale and all the things that happens to Jonah. And it seems like it teaches a lot of kind of, if you just read Jonah very surface level, that teaches a lot of lessons about God forgiving people and Jonah being a brat. But Jesus references Jonah as if it's a real story. Jesus says, the only sign, so they're asking for a sign, they're asking for a miracle. And how do we know that we're God? You're God. Give us another sign. And Jesus had been doing miracles this whole time. The funny thing is when you're reading through, Jesus does miracle and miracle and miracle and miracle, and then they say, show us a miracle, Jesus, as if that's what they're going to need to believe. And Jesus says the only sign you'll get is the sign of Jonah, that the Son of Man will go into the depth of the earth for 3 days. And he refers to Jonah being in the belly of the fish, the great fish or the whale. So Jonah is a real story that a lot of people thought was a parable or a fable. Adam and Eve is another example that a lot of people historically have said, well, that's just really a parable. We know that our first ancestors were monkeys. And then eventually the monkeys became less and less monkeys, and they at one point crossed over the threshold from being less simian to being more human. And at that point, that was our technical first human ancestors. And there's a weird... God created the monkeys. Yeah. Well, this is usually the preface to... God actually started with single-celled organisms, and then he had to wait the 400 million billion years until they developed. Yes, ma'am.
I like Jonah and the whale. Depicting the ship and everything is floating around in the whale's belly.
Oh, the ship is in the whale's belly. I don't think the ship isn't in the whale's belly. Just the that was Pinocchio. In Pinocchio, Geppetto's ship is swallowed in the whale's belly, but there might be some crossed streams there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you keep using two terms that are somewhat interchangeable.
Yes.
Which is parable and fable.
Yes.
Do you consider those to be the same term?
No. Parable and fables are different, but they're often, it's like a parable, a fable, an allegory. A metaphor and a simile, those are similar, but not the exact same. One of them uses like or as. I think this is a simile. And metaphor does not use like or as. But a parable is the shortest definition is it is a hidden thing. It is a hidden meaning in a story.
In my mind, I'm thinking that a parable is a story that is told to teach.
Yes.
A fable is a story told to entertain.
Right. I was thinking more along the lines of Aesop's fables.
But the purpose of a fable is really more to entertain.
Yeah, it's more to entertain. A lot of times there's usually a law thing tacked onto it, therefore don't... Yeah, the moral of the story is that kind of thing. But what I mean by fable is it's an invented story. It's not real. It's not a real historical thing that happened. But
when I hear parable,
yeah.
I think of, I'm going to tell you a story. It's true.
Yeah.
But the intent is not the story. The intent is the lesson.
Right.
Comes down to the parable.
Well, and that can be the case. So a parable, the goal of a parable, I would say yes, I agree that the goal of a parable is more, well, there's two things. Biblically, a parable does two things. It makes things more confusing for the unbeliever, which God specifically says in Luke 8, and it gives us more information as a believer. It's so jam-packed, so dense with information that the unbeliever will look at it and say, this doesn't make any sense. But the believer who comes to it with eyes of faith will say, now I understand even more than if you just explained this to me directly. The Bible doesn't use fables, really. We have maybe like Aesop's fables, and we have things like, where it's just kind of children's stories. But yeah, I just meant to use the term fable or the term parable or allegory or metaphor or simile or something like that in the sense that a lot of people will say this was not a historical event. This was an invented story designed to teach a thing or to convey something. It's true, quote unquote, in a sense. And this is what a lot of people will say about Adam and Eve as well, is they'll say, well, the story of Adam and Eve in the garden was not a historical event. The story was just kind of meant to teach us about how we should behave and be nice to each other or something. It's usually always law. It's never about our Savior. Yes, sir?
You also need to wonder where that question was coming from. What's the intent of that question?
That's a big thing, yeah.
Is it to prove something, like a proof text field?
Right.
You got to be careful with that as well.
Yeah, so the intent behind the question, it's a similar thing to when people ask why would God do a thing? And sometimes it's because the intent is because I would do it differently. Why would God allow the tree in the Garden of Eden? Well, it's because I wouldn't do that. But in the sense of, so for example, Adam and Eve and Noah's flood in particular, they're often referred to by people as, as either allegories or as myths. Maybe a better word would be a myth. Where it wasn't a thing that actually happened, but it was a story that got passed down to the kids to kind of explain, why Apollo was pulling the sun through the sky in his chariot. It's a myth used to explain why the sun moves across the sky, but it's not true. What was that? Could be a fable, yes. Well, and then the motivation, unfortunately, a lot of times behind this, particularly with Adam and Eve, is there's a lot of information that we get from the story of Adam and Eve. It's not just that Adam and Eve were created and that God made them from dirt and God made Eve from the rib of Adam. So for example, if you want to believe that, for example, women are a lesser species than men, you don't start with a story about Eve being made out of Adam's side. That gets in the way of your belief that women should be under the feet of men. And God did not design women under the feet of men. If you read Adam and Eve, and it's a true story, then God made Eve to be not the paraclete. I forget the word. It's the same word used for the Holy Spirit, the helpmate, the side of Adam. Well, this is a huge problem if you're saying that here's man and here's woman under his feet. Now you've got to find a way to kind of dismiss Adam and Eve as being a story, just a story. It's not true. They fit together. They're two part. They're one being, one body, separated and then joined together in an even better way than they first were. Yes, sir.
I just asked AI.
Yeah. Over which?
It says the big difference between a fable and a parable is talking animals and actual people.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I mean, that is a common difference. A lot of times you have the talking animal. I'm trying to think. I don't think. Yeah, Balaam. Yeah, well, Balaam. That's a problem. Is Balaam had a talking animal? There's not a whole lot of, but the serpent, or the seraphim, depending on how you translate it. The dragon in the garden, was that a talking animal or is that a talking angel? But the point being is that the people will try to deny a certain truth by saying, well, that didn't, we can't believe, I really want to believe in a 400 billion year old earth. Therefore, this problem of God creating the universe by speaking it into existence, this gets in the way of my worldview. Therefore, I have to find a way to say that it didn't really happen, but it's just kind of a nice story that we say, oh, it's true in a sense. So they'll point to examples. They'll say, well, Genesis 1, it was written poetically. Yes, there are poetic elements in Genesis 1. There's also poetic elements in Psalm 150, which, if I remember right, talks about a historical battle that happened. But it's written about in a poetic way. I use the example all the time of, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, it rhymes. That means it's a poem. That means it didn't happen, right? Because it's poetic, therefore it must be a made-up event, right? No, in 1492, Columbus did actually sail the ocean, which is often blue. These are real things that happen, but just because they're described in a poetic nature doesn't make them any less historically accurate. So there's different ways and different reasons that people have to dismiss things as parable or as a fable or a story or an allegory or a myth or any of these other things. And a lot of the reasoning behind considering Job as this is, one, there's not a whole lot of information on Job. He's not a character that shows up a lot in the Bible like, let's say, Abraham or Joseph. There's not a whole lot of details in the book of Job. This is when it happened. These are the people around him. These are the areas around him. So there's a lot of questions that we can't answer. But there's also a couple parts in Job that are uncomfortable for us to deal with. Why is God having a conversation with the devil? And why does it seem like a frat house bet on, I bet I can make him turn away from evil? It's reading this through the lens of two humans interacting with each other and just torturing Job for the fun of it. That becomes really uncomfortable to deal with, and a lot of people would just rather say, well, this is just an example. This is not a real thing that happened. This is a myth that teaches us a sort of story. I tend to think the other hand. I tend to think that Job is actually real and an example of real world suffering. That God does actually use, it's not just a fable or a parable. God does use real world suffering. Real people do suffer real things, and God does bring them through those times to the end, ultimately to resurrection. Ultimately, I don't know. So we're doing a follow-up Bible study on Job, I guess, today. Yes, ma'am. There's a lot to say on Job. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say that it's the whole idea of Satan is allowed to have evil in the world because we are allowed choices.
Yeah.
And so God has to allow that evil to happen in order for us to have choices.
This is the, I don't know if the right word is paradox. This is the unfortunate reality, is that if God allows us to have choices, then one of those choices might potentially be to do bad things. And this is what happened in the garden. And could God have made people who only ever behaved? Sure, he could have. There's a lot of things that we don't really understand. Like when we're finally resurrected, when we're finally in heaven, we no longer will ever have a desire to sin, but yet we'll have some capacity of freedom. I don't understand. Like would Adam and Eve have sinned if there was not a snake in the garden? That kind of thing. Yes, sir.
There's only one statement you can make about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you when I laid
Where were you? My ways are not his ways. His ways are higher than ours. This is something that we have to keep in mind.
We debate this and we wonder and we pontificate.
Yeah.
And is it all just for us?
Well, and that's again, this goes back to the motivation of why would we ask these questions? If the question is, well, I wouldn't do that, why would God do that? Because I know better than him.
Ding, ding, ding.
That's it. In the case of Job, I think it's really often misunderstood. If I want to say, well, if I were God, I would not have even talked to the devil. I would not have. Fine, whatever. I could imagine imaginary scenarios all I want to, but if I believe that this happened, what can I learn from this thing? Right now, why did God do this? But what can I learn from this? And again, I may be treading over ground that you guys dealt with last week, but in the book of Job, what does Job have at the beginning of the book? What in the beginning of the story, is he poor? Is he single? No, he's not. He's wealthy. He's rich. He's got lots of stuff. Not only does he have lots of stuff, but he's faithful and a huge family. Was it 7 daughters or something like that? 7 children. 7 sons, 7 daughters, something like that? Okay, 7 sons and daughters. A perfect number. What a coincidence. 7 sons and daughters. Okay. And he has what, like 100 cows, 100 sheep, 100 whatever. He loses it all, except for his wife, which is an important thing. He loses it all. So what can we learn from this story? So Job loses everything except for his wife. He's impoverished. His health is gone. God tells the devil, he says, one thing you're not allowed to do, you may not take the life of my servant Job. Well, if we understand Adam and Eve, if we understand the story of the Garden of Eden, remember what you were doing with your fingers, or they're crossed like this? That's one life right there. You're not allowed to take the life of Job, which means you're not allowed to take the life of Job's wife. The two shall become one flesh. Job's wife is off limits. The devil is not allowed to kill Job's wife because he was not allowed to kill Job. So that's one of the things that we can learn. Job is an excellent wedding text if you know how to work it. 40-something chapters we have to read through. But even though Job is not perfect and his wife is not perfect, I'll acknowledge that. But here's the thing that we can learn from this. So Job has 100 cows at the beginning, right? And at the end, God blesses him with what? Double what he had before, right? 200 cows. He had 100 sheep before. He gets 200 sheep afterwards. He had 7 kids before. He gets 7 kids at the end. Every other number is doubled in everything that he has. All of his possessions are doubled. He doesn't get a second wife. Well, she's with him the entire time. But he gets 7 kids at the beginning. They all die in a tragedy. And at the end, God gives him 7 kids. Why doesn't he give him 14? Do you know? I know you know, because I've told you this one before. Why doesn't he give him 14? Because Job has 14 kids. Because the 7 kids that die at the beginning are now all in heaven, and God gives him 7 more kids to go to heaven. God doubles the amount of children that he has because they all get to go to heaven together. Everything that Job has, his possessions are doubled on the earth, but his children are doubled in heaven. So what can we take away from something like Job? We can say, look at the suffering that he went through, but look at how God sees man and wife as one life. Look at how God sees the children who died versus the children who lived and died later. And there are 14 children in heaven because of that. This is how God sees life. This is how God sees resurrection. This is how God sees man and wife. And Job's statements at the end are absolutely correct. Oh, that my words were written in a book. Oh, that they were inscribed with lead. I know that my Redeemer lives, and on the last day I shall see him in the flesh. In the flesh, he says, I will see him face to face. Like that. I will see him. Not in a distance, not obscure, not in a spiritual way. I won't see him in a sort of parabolic way, a sort of mythical way. I will see, I know that my Redeemer lives, and on the last day I will stand and I will see him in the flesh, face to face. Job preaches the resurrection, not just of the spirit, but the resurrection of the body as well. This was not this later concept that Jesus made up or that Paul made up later, as the Sadducees would believe. This was a reality that existed in the very oldest book in the Bible, in the book of Job, that your children, when they go to heaven, you will see them again. Amen. You will see them again. And your wife, she is one flesh with you. You are one life together. And your Redeemer lives. The crucified Lord, the theme of the conference I just went to was, he is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. I know that my Redeemer lives, and I will live too. Not in a spiritual way, but in spirit and in flesh. Your body that you have right now will be perfected and raised on the last day. It is not something to throw away. It is not garbage. It is not a shell that holds you back. It's not any of these Gnostic ideas. It is you. This is you. This flesh that you have is you, and it will be perfected. And all of this is in the oldest book of the Bible. All of these things that are true are in the oldest book of the Bible. And throughout the entire book of Job, he deals with these struggles and he deals with this suffering. And I think it just makes so much more sense that these are real. Because what does Job go through? His children die. Do parents have children die in this world? Yes. It's terrible. It's tragic. And Job still has faith. Job gets really, really sick. His health is horrible. He's in terrible pain every day. Does that happen to us? Does that happen to people on the earth? Yes, people do. It's not a parable. People do actually get sick. I know it's impossible to believe, but people get so sick, they just can't move sometimes. It's so painful. And Job literally, actually, really did historically go through that, and he still believed. All of these things. Do people ever lose their money, their property, the things that they have that they worked? Absolutely. The things that they work their entire life for, an entire lifetime of wealth, great wealth, can be wiped away in an instant. Yes, even Christians deal with poverty. It is real poverty. It is real loss. And Job goes through this, and Job still believes. He still has faith. Job struggles. He has all of his friends, except for one. He's got one good friend, if you remember. But all of his other friends are idiots. And his wife maybe should not have said the things that she said. She has her own problems. And Job, at the end, after listening to his friends and after listening to his wife, he starts to say things he should not have said. He starts to hate that he was alive in the first place. He regrets that he was even born. And yet he does not curse God and die, as his wife says. His response to her is Job, you need to calm your tongue a little bit. Oh, surely all knowledge will die with you. which is a wicked, sarcastic way of Job responding to his wife. But do we as Christians, are we surrounded by people, even the ones closest to us, saying, your suffering is proof that God doesn't love you, or if he exists at all, he might not even exist. Maybe God is punishing you. We hear this. This is a regular theme, especially in the faith healing, the word of faith movements, is that if you are sick, if you are impoverished, if your children are suffering, then this is because you do not believe enough, and this is because you are not good enough, and God is punishing you. And this is not the truth. God was not punishing Job. None of this was punishment for Job. And Job suffered. He had no idea that he was suffering. He had no idea why he was suffering. And this is Christians. This is people who are living through life and saying, why am I suffering? Why am I suffering a divorce? Why am I suffering the death of my children? Why am I suffering the loss of my money and my wealth? Why am I suffering the loss of my health? All of these things. So I think that absolutely Job epitomizes the life of, people. It's all the suffering that you could go through in your life, and Job gets it all at the same time. And somehow he still has faith, and somehow God still brings him through it all miraculously, and somehow God still blesses him all at the end. And this is the promise that you have, except it's not that you'll get 100 cows or 200 cows, but it's that you'll get everything in heaven.
But Job is the only person who ever went through this.
Oh yeah, Job is the only person who ever experienced, who Whoever experienced suffering, whoever experienced loss, whoever experienced people around him telling him to doubt God, to curse God and die. Never happened to anybody else, right? Yeah. And again, this is why I think that it's real. I think it makes so much more sense that it's a true, we're being sarcastic, that it's a true story of what actually happened. Because here's an example. This isn't just what would Pinocchio do in this instance? This happened. And you know people this happened to. You know people who've gotten sick. You know people who've lost children. And God was able to bring Job through it in faith. God is able to bring these people. It's not hopeless. Yes, sir.
Okay, two things on that. One,
Yeah.
If it wasn't Job, we wouldn't know this.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you said before, a test is not to fail you, it's to show that you can.
Right.
You can make it through.
Yep.
The second thing is, the pruner shear, the refiner's fire,
Yeah.
moving the dross, all of that's throughout the entire Bible.
That's a constant thing.
I think Job is the most clearest picture of that.
Yeah, all of it together. Then the interesting thing is that Job, this happens to so many people in the Bible, but Job is kind of the concentration of the guy who has everything in his life taken away from him, so he understands what the most important thing in his life really is. And again, so it's a test. It's not a punishment. Job is not punished for being righteous.
We are not punished.
We're not punished for being righteous.
All of our sicknesses and all of our divorces and loss of children and children apostating, those are just tests.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, you remember the crucible. So if those of you who are not familiar, in the Marine Corps there's something called the crucible. And the idea for the crucible is it's a test that happens at the end of boot camp. And it's miserable. It's like 3 days of no eating. You hike, 40 miles or something like that? You never stop hiking. You never stop moving. You're barely eating, 2 hours of sleep. And it's miserable. It's this horrible experience. It's this physically grueling, spiritually, emotionally grueling experience that you go through at the end of boot camp. After which you get declared a U.S. Marine. You get the Eagle Globe and I cried. I don't know if you cried. I cried, yeah. You get the Eagle Globe and anchor in your hand. Congratulations, you've made it as a Marine. The idea, though, is that it's a test that you have been prepared for 3 months to take. It is something that it's something that the Marine Corps knows that you are able to endure. Now, Paul talks about this in Philippians 4:13. And this is a verse that is often taken out of context, and I really wish the context was included because it means so much more in the context. Now the verse is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? If you read the Greek, I believe it translates better, I can do all this through the word is panta, it means all. I can do all this through Christ who strengthens me. All what? If you read the previous verses, Paul is talking about, I have learned what it is like to be lacking and to be in wealth, to be content, to be happy, and to be in need. And I can endure all these things because I know that God has me. Job is able to endure the most horrific experiences because God is taking care of him. And the reality is, and I know that we each wish that we did not have to be tested with these things, but that you actually can endure whatever God allows you to go through. It is possible for you to have faith in spite of whatever sickness, whatever impoverishment, divorce, death, hardship that you're going through, death of your children, that sort of thing. It is horrific as it sounds. It is possible for you to have faith through these things. If these things happen to you, this is not God punishing you, but this is something that God will bring you through. And again, it's frustrating to be grieving the loss. And this is one of the reasons why I have Job 40 in all of my funerals that I do. I usually have John 10, so this is the resurrection of Lazarus. But Job 40 as well. Because it's difficult to hear, yeah, but that's Job. Yeah, things got better for him at the end, but I'm different. Well, no, you're not. Job suffered different things than you, but God doesn't love you any less than he loved Job. God is going to bring you through to the end and bring you to heaven at the end as much as he did Job. You are no less saved than Job. You are no less loved than Job. You are no less cared for than Job. And this is why it makes it into every funeral text, every funeral sermon that I have. because we get that joy at the end. We know what it's like on the other side, not because we've lived it yet, but because Job lived it, because we know about people who have lived it too.
Another context is I can go through Poetic. All things work for good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose.
Yes, all things were. Oh,
That's a hard one too.
that's a hard one, and I don't. This is one of the reasons why I don't tend to use it. It's all God's plan. It's usually paraphrased like this: "It's all God's plan." Well, you don't know what God's plan is. I know part of God's plan. I know that God's plan at the last day, I will see him in the flesh face to face, and I know that part of God's plan, but I don't know why I'm suffering. I don't know why I'm going through whatever I'm going through. I don't know why this has to happen to people that I love. So I'm not going to presume to say, well, it's all God's plan that your house was broken into and your car was set on fire. Well, that could be somebody sinning. God is not looking the other way. He'll deal with it, but it could be a consequence of sin. Yes, sir.
So, if God is our Father, what do fathers do?
Spare.
No.
Is that where you're going? No? Okay.
I mean, in a grander scale.
Yeah.
Fathers try to teach their children.
Yeah, fathers teach their children.
So,
Yes.
How do they teach them? Sometimes it's harsh lessons, sometimes it's not.
Right.
To me, I think everything that goes on in our life is His intent to draw us closer and to teach us.
Right.
So everything that we go through in our lives, is there a lesson in it?
That's a good question to keep in mind. Regardless of your suffering, you want to know, how can I end this as soon as possible? That's a good question to ask. And to pray for God, please remove this suffering. But a good question to ask is, what can I learn about God or from God through this experience?
What's He trying to teach me?
And this can be I don't want to say a distraction, but a great alternative to focus on instead of, I am suffering so bad. It can be, I'm sure some of you guys are already thinking of examples in your own life. I'm thinking of, examples in my life where I was going through some stuff and I was thinking, what can God teach me here? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Here, Jonah.
Oh, you.
Yeah, one thing that's helped me is, we say, why me, Lord? Why not me?
Yeah.
Why do I think that I am above such experiences?
Right.
It helps to be humble.
Right.
Even during suffering.
And think about it again, bringing it back to Job. Out of all the people on the earth that God could have afflicted, He could have afflicted Job's friends. They would have been more deserving of it than he was. And Job was righteous, and God still allowed him to go through that suffering. Yes?
I think a lot of people who don't have faith can't possibly, or they don't understand how faith, just faith, can help you and give you the strength and comfort you.
Right.
When you're going through those difficult times, they don't have a concept
Right.
of that.
How can you have joy? I don't want to say happiness, because there's a difference. Because Christians can be sad. But Christians also have joy. How can you have joy? What do you have? I can have joy because I have hope. I have hope because I have faith. And I have faith because God loves me. Faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these things is love. Because on the last day, it'll be okay. It'll not just be okay. There will never again be anything ever wrong again. This is, if you're enduring suffering, and you know that there's an end to the suffering, you know for a fact that there's an end to the suffering, and everything's going to be better after this. If you are having a splinter pulled out of your finger, and it is the most excruciating pain you've ever experienced, but you know that once that splinter is out, it's not going to hurt anymore. I know it still hurts a little, but it'll be better after that. You can endure that. You can have joy set on the future. You can endure going to doctor's appointments and surgeries, as miserable as they may be, because you know afterwards, I'll be able to walk better. My feet won't hurt every day, or my spine will be straight, or whatever is going on. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the biggest part about it is, if you look at an atheist or a Christian, we have love because we got Christ.
Right.
They do not.
They don't. They don't have that love.
They're missing a big hole there.
So they don't understand. They say, why are you happy? Because someone loves me enough to die on the cross for my sins.
Right.
Because someone loves me enough that no matter what happens to me, He will heal me at the end. He will raise me up, and I'll see Him face to face, and I'll get to hug Him and all my loved ones who are believers in heaven again.
And if you look at their relationships and everything, and their ultimate life overall, it's really missing.
It is. It's
Going to be
they don't know how the story ends for them. They don't have a good ending. They have to worry about here and now. They can't be eternally joyful. They have to be happy right now. I have to be having a good time right now because I don't have the joy of the future to look forward to. So how can I?
With money and things, like materialistic and.
Yeah, and we know that money and health and relationships, just like Job, they don't necessarily last forever, faithful or unfaithful. So with that, again, I guess we didn't get into numbers, but it was good. I love talking about Job. Job is increasingly becoming one of my favorite books, especially the end. Job has hope in it. Job has explanations for suffering in it that we don't have so much in other books. Job also has levity in it. It has sarcasm in it, especially because we know that Job and his wife make it through to the end all right. It's okay to laugh a bit and say, look at Job, did you seriously just tell that to your wife? Or it's okay to look at Job's friends and say, you idiots. Because at the end, God sets them in their place, and then Job makes sacrifices for them, so they're all forgiven. So it's okay to say, oh man, you guys are going to love it in 3 chapters when they learn their lesson. Like, that sort of, or I keep forgetting his friend. Job's one friend who makes sense. I don't remember. He's either the youngest or the oldest. He might be the younger. I might be thinking of the brothers of Joseph. But the one guy, there's one guy who makes sense, who explains it. He says, Job, I thought you believed in a God. You quit your whining. Where were you? Like, he basically prefaces God's statements. He says a lot of stuff that God will then say. And God shows up, doesn't yell at the one guy who's making sense, thankfully. He shows up and basically restates this guy's point in a better way. And I can't imagine being that guy. Like, I've been yelled at before, but I can't imagine being the guy who actually said something right and then somebody comes in and proves my point. Just that must be an awkward experience. Like, oh, that's God. Yeah, I told you. Oh boy. All right, let's close with the doxology.